The Red Button. Chapter 1. Vince Thompson was transfixed by the pedestrians below. There were so many beneath his dangling feet. They went about their business, lost in their own little worlds, like an endless swarm of ants. They would mention him in the press after they learned what he had done, show depressing newscasts with incredibly dramatic anchors and newscasters. There would be websites devoted to Vince Thompson's tragic and depressing life. None of it mattered, really. No amount of fame and fortune would be enough to dissuade him from his morbid task. Judge Vince Thompson had a strict schedule to follow and was expected to be exact as a member of the Supreme Court. He had the same morning regimen for more than 25 years. He woke up, did his routine, took a shower, got dressed, quickly drank some coffee, and left the old Victorian-style house before the crack of dawn. His beloved wife of 20 years never knew when Vince left for work. Most days she was accustomed to sleeping in, a luxury of a stay-at-home wife in affluent circles. While driving to work, Vince enjoyed an excellent audiobook to get him into his creative mindset. Why would a Supreme Court judge need to tap into his creative side? Vince could never understand. His therapist advised him to pursue his creative interests while outside of work as a way to combat the tedium of daily existence. Vince opened his computer and looked over the agenda as soon as he walked into his office. The same thing he did every day. No trial hearings scheduled. Good. Just a couple of boring lunch meetings and the regular consultation with Vivian, a 22-year-old paralegal in dire need of guidance on some ongoing cases, and the occasional spanking. This was a 1.5-year ongoing appointment, which the judge grew to love and respect religiously. Vince went through the business meetings almost entirely on autopilot. Those lunches usually involved a great deal of head-nodding, clapping and laughing, with a mouth so open that at the end, the corners of his lips felt painful and dry. Luckily, the dull portion of the day was quickly over. Vivian strolled into Vince's office, carrying a legal pad and some folders. She closed the massive wooden door behind her and clumsily dropped all the documents on the floor. With a well-rehearsed movement, the young woman bent down to pick them up. Her legs taut as a bowstring. The judge smacked his lips in lustful approval. After 15 minutes of passionate lovemaking atop the mahogany desk, the young girl dressed herself and sat down on a chair, stern look on her face. "We need to talk," Vivian said. Vince felt a knot in his stomach. His many years of marriage had taught him that those 4 words together would not only be unpleasant, but would almost certainly result in the opening of a bottle of hard liquor. The young woman stared Vince down. Her azure eyes pierced him with expectation. Whatever she had to say, he knew he couldn't refuse. Vince was ready to accept and deal with whatever she did or said at this point in their relationship. "I'm pregnant," Vivian said. "I beg your pardon," Vince replied. You are what?" "I am pregnant." The blood drained from Vince's face. The judge walked over to the vintage 16th century globe bar and got a crystal bottle with 2 glasses from inside. Placing the glasses on the desk, he filled Vivian's glass and took a big gulp straight out of the bottle. Quietly, Vince studied her. She was such a delicate being. After having sex, her fair features always seemed so much softer. He was completely stunned by the news, regardless of how stunning she was. His entire painstakingly planned and well-organized life was about to come apart. "I see," Vince said. "I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I don't want to be a mom at 22, Vince. I'm way too young for that. A single mom at 22? My life is over," Vivian said, fighting tears. "How long have you known?" Vince asked. "I found out yesterday. I wanted to call you, but—" "I'm going to support you no matter what, baby. Have you decided if you want to keep it?" Vince asked. "How can I decide such a thing on my own?" she replied. Vivian just stood there silent, hundreds of questions swirling in Vince's mind. His legs became heavier by the second. He leaned on the desk and ran his fingers through the back of his head. She was pregnant, but how? They were so careful. A terrifying question surfaced above all the others. He had to ask. "Are you sure it's mine?" Vince asked. She jumped out of her seat and slapped the man with all her might. "Disgusting pig," she said. Vince found himself standing in his office as the young lady stormed off, burning red in his cheek. What was he meant to say or do? Later that night, the judge retold what happened to him after lunch to his wife. Obviously, he made up the names, dates, and age gap, but the premise and the moral dilemma was the same. That was just how he would talk to her about a lawsuit. Nothing out of the ordinary. Vince trusted her unquestioningly. Linda was an erudite. She spent her time after finishing the housework reading and studying different subjects at length. For quite some time, Vince struggled to keep up with her voracious appetite for learning. He counted once. In a single year, this woman read 278 volumes on various subjects. "I must say this DJ fellow is, as the kids say these days, a complete bolt," Linda said while paging through an enormous volume of Botanical Curses and Poisons, The Shadow Lives of Plants. "Bolt?" Vince asked. "He is screwed, Vince. If DJ doesn't confess on the stand that he is the father of the boy, he is going to prison for a long time. On the other hand, if he does confess, his wife of 15 years will have proof coming straight from his mouth that he's been cheating on her. Then he would definitely wish he was in prison. Hell hath no fury over a woman scorned. If I was her, I would completely disregard those 15 years in a millisecond. A decade and a half of lies and manipulation. It would be biblical, let me tell you," Linda said. Vince bent and twisted his fingers until a few cracked. His eyes were fixed on the tiny tea candle resting on the table. He dared not meet her gaze directly. "You know what I would do if I were this DJ. I would climb to the highest building I could find, take a long, hard look at the people below, say a prayer for peace, and just jump," declared Linda. "Woman," disagreed Vince. "No, I am serious. How could you waste so many lives just because you wanted to feel young and viral again? A middle-aged CEO of a publicly traded company, a beautiful marriage of 15 years all wasted. And for what? For some low-life hussy with deep cleavage and tiny waist. Please, this little girl will turn around and sue him to the ground if she is smart. And by the sound of it, she is. Good on her. The world is full of stupid rich men who will do anything to satisfy their carnal desires. One less of them isn't going to make such a difference. The only thing that depends on them is their ego and masculinity. Sadly, the world seems to need and nurture men like that. That is why we are appropriately fucked." "Linda Thompson, that's enough. What's gotten into you? What kind of language is that?" jumped Vince. "What? You asked me." "I'm sorry for my language, Judge," playfully replied Linda. They sat in silence after that. She continued to read her book, and he watched the small tea candle burn away and slowly die. One of the things Vince never could deny is how passionate Linda got about subjects close to heart. A right set of moral values deeply instilled in her from a young age, and that southern hospitality made her the perfect woman. Why did he have to step outside of his marriage then? Was she not enough? Was she not smart enough? Beautiful enough? Sexual enough? Vince was sadly limited to responding no to those queries. He wondered then, why? Chapter 2. On the other side of town at dawn's break, a hairy hand slapped an old alarm clock. Dawson's head pounded as he slowly stood up. Binge drinking until the late hours of the night had to stop at some point. He found a blonde, naked woman sleeping on her stomach next to him. Her back moved up and down in a delightful rhythm. She was breathing. These days, one can never be too careful. Bare feet slapped on the floor and made their way to the kitchen. Next to the coffee machine was an old black shoebox. Dawson picked it up and put it in the corner of the counter. Later, he thought. First, coffee and a smoke. The familiar, punchy taste of Marlboro Reds filled his lungs. Dawson could breathe again. Glancing about, he counted every article of clothing lying on the floor, both hers and his. Yes, it was an exciting night. He began picking them up one by one after turning on the television. The Senate is holding a procedural vote on whether to advance the bipartisan border security deal and foreign aid package, with aid for the two warring nations. Senate Republicans are expected to block it amid opposition from the former president and top House Republicans. The news reporter rambled on. "Good morning," a female voice said behind Dawson. "Oh, hey, good morning," the man replied. "Misty, and you are?" "Dawson." "Bathroom?" she asked. The woman, who was still completely nude, slowly made her way towards the door as Dawson gestured to the left. The man was leaning against the counter, admiring the beauty of the female figure. He took the black shoebox under his arm, poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down in front of the television. Dawson Jenkins had a secret, one that he could not reveal to anyone, ever. Not for the lack of trying, of course, but just because of sheer self-preservation. This box that he was holding was more than just an ordinary box. It was far from it. Was it a superpower, magic, or weird alien technology? Dawson didn't know. All he knew was that every morning for the previous 7 years, when it was opened, there would be something inside that would help someone stay alive or help him survive the day. Dawson performed silent acts of bravery for 7 years. He remembered nearly everything that had happened. He thought of the two that always stuck out to him. On a cold December morning, he opened the shoebox and inside it was a smallish crowbar. He took it with the utmost wonder and placed it in his backpack. While waiting for the train that morning, a man screamed in agony behind him. Dawson spun around and noticed a small Asian man wedged between the subway doors. A miscalculation of the operational chip for the doors had caused it, claimed authorities after that. Dawson plunged through the throng of people, pulled the crowbar from his backpack, and used all his strength and resolve to free the unfortunate bastard, just before the train took off. Another time, on a hot July day, he made his morning coffee, opened the box, and found a big can of bear spray. Later that same day, while preparing some reports for his boss, Dawson overheard one of his colleagues boasting about going for a 2-day hike in the Rockies. Even though he didn't like or relate to that person, the man with the mysterious shoebox felt obliged to say something. "Do you have bear spray packed?" Dawson asked. "Nah, but I doubt I'll need it. I grew up in the woods. I know how to protect myself from bears, Jenkins," the cocky man replied. Dawson grabbed the bear spray and gifted it to his unpleasant co-worker. After an uneventful weekend, Dawson came to work to find a bottle of Glen McKenna on his desk. A small note attached to it read, "Thank you, Jenkins, I wouldn't have survived without you." Toilet flushing disrupted the man's reminiscences. With wet hair and still all kinds of naked, Misty strolled past him. "I'm going to take off," she said. "Sure, have a nice day," replied Dawson. The front door slammed shut a few moments later. He lit up a smoke. Now was the moment. The man could still feel the hairs on his arms standing up, even after 7 years. He opened the black shoebox. Dawson's ears started ringing. His pupils dilated. His heart rate skyrocketed. There was a note inside. 7 years, and not a single letter. Oh, how Dawson wished and hoped for an explanation. He longed for any form of communication with whatever this was. Why him and why a black shoebox was among his many unanswered questions. Under the note lay a rectangular black metal box with a brilliant red button. Dawson lifted both. All it said on the note was, "Press to restart the world." Dawson's hands were trembling violently. He knew the box would never lie to him. He ran his fingers across the cold metal of the box. He sat in silence for several minutes. His thoughts are rushing. Up until now, the box had contained insignificant items with no context. This now. Dawson felt lightheaded from his constant back and forth pacing. After taking a final drag from his cigarette, he threw it out the window, picked up the note and the button, and walked out of the apartment. Work be damned. Aimlessly walking the streets, Dawson was considering the significance of his recent assignment. He frequently found himself visiting the dependable, old, self-pitying well and swilling heavily from its rusty waters. He had to choose between giving the planet's 8 billion inhabitants a fresh start and abandoning them to suffer from a faith that was likely worse than death. The heavy-laden man's thoughts turned to the most significant historical events, probably the first recorded city in human existence, Jericho. Then the pyramids in Egypt, Greek democracy and philosophy, the might of the Roman Empire, and the whimper with which it faded from existence. All the South American civilizations and the wonders they achieved with essentially zero mathematical knowledge. The countless Chinese and Japanese dynasties, without whom Asia wouldn't be the same. The wars, the revolutions, and the endless parade of souls who fought for causes long forgotten but somehow moved humanity forward. The discovery of the so-called New World and the wonders and bloodshed it brought with it. The Industrial Revolution and how it changed the world in less than a century. Europe drowning the globe in 2 world wars, the second one bringing it to its current state. All the wonders of modern science, technology, innovation, and all-time high prosperity. All the treasures and oddities left buried in the ground, forgotten, but still there waiting to be discovered and displayed for all to see. All the petty squabbles and insignificant quarrels of people's everyday lives. A world full of history and hope, restarted, just like that, with the press of a button, by a simple data analyst named Dawson Jenkins. It didn't seem natural. Nobody prepared him for a decision of such magnitude, a task in front of which even Sisyphus would scrunch his eyebrows and give up. Perhaps drinking was the answer, sip after sip, and still nothing. The madman kept going despite the whiskey burning through him repeatedly. Dawson's gaze settled on a young woman seated across the bar. She had sad eyes, fair features, and long, straight brown hair. He stared. "Hey," Dawson said. The bartender swiftly arrived. "Her next drink is on me," holding a $50 bill in front of the bartender. "You got it, boss." The bald man behind the bar shuffled towards the lonesome woman and said something to her so only she could hear it. She stood up and grabbed her purse. Dawson was staring at her as she walked in his direction. A body built for sin was hidden by a tight shirt and even tighter skirt. The woman extended her hand and flipped him off. "Not today, asshole," she said. With complete amusement, he lifted his glass. "What is your name, at least?" Dawson asked. "Vivian," she replied. A few sleepy patrons jumped as the dive bar's green door slammed shut. "If not today, when?" The man's eyes widened. His mouth fell open. Imagine she was correct. Vivian. Not right now. Until now, Dawson never considered not using or disregarding the object from the box presented to him. Opportunities always arose for the object to be used to someone's benefit. What would happen if he just didn't press the button? He would leave it on his shelf in case the world truly needed a restart. What a wonderful idea, Dawson thought to himself. Procrastinating for the betterment of humanity. Fantastic. Dawson picked up the box, paid his bill, and headed home with renewed energy. He spent half an hour searching for a sufficient spot to put the button in. After much deliberation, 7 cigarettes smoked and a whole lot of cursing, he opted to leave it on the coffee table. That way it would always be in sight, constantly reminding him of what might come. The man drank and smoked heavily for the remainder of the night, pacing nervously around the house. He never had to consider the possibility that one of the items in the box not been used. At last, the wall clock reached 12. Nothing happened. A weight of biblical proportions lifted from his chest. Weary, Dawson dozed off on the couch beside the black shoebox and the gleaming red button. Chapter 3. As he stared at the starless night outside, intrusive thoughts were ruling Vince's mind. A month had passed since that faithful conversation with Vivian, and he still hadn't talked with her. Linda mumbled something in her sleep. Poor woman, Vince thought. She didn't deserve this, the humiliation and embarrassment coming her way. 20 years of marriage would disappear in pain and hopelessness. Something had to be done. Enough was enough. Vince grabbed his phone and texted Vivian. He stared at the empty screen below his message. The 3 moving dots beneath his text caused a sharp spike in his body's adrenaline. Vivian answered, "Come on over." Vince got in his car and paused. His thoughts turned to his sleeping wife upstairs. He had to make a choice. Without a doubt, he loved both of them. Vince's life with Linda was flawless. For over 20 years of shared life, there was not a single fight between the two. Linda gladly gave her life away in the name of the family. And yet the words "I love you" rang hollow in Vince's mind. He could not even remember the last time he heard her say them with genuine sincerity. But Vivian made him feel alive, made him feel not only young again, but genuinely experience life in a way he had never experienced it before. It wasn't just the sex. Everything about this young woman filled his heart and soul with exuberance. Nevertheless, as he had to end one of those relationships, either the comfort and security of marriage or the one that gave him an insatiable lust for life. "Are you coming?" Vivian texted again. Vince put the car in drive and drove away, taking care not to wake poor Linda. Fortunately, it wasn't too far to Vivian's tiny apartment. Vince loved this little place. It exuded a carefree and lively spirit, while maintaining a meticulous appearance. He could already smell the lovely scent of incense candles coming from Vivian's place as he ascended the stairs. Vince's stomach was coiled into such a tiny ball that the medical professionals performing his autopsy would be astounded by its small size if he were to pass away right now. "Come on in," Vivian said. He stepped inside the studio apartment and threw his jacket on one of the kitchen chairs. Vivian didn't wait a second longer. "Have you anything to say?" She lit up a cigarette. "That is not good for the baby," Vince replied. Vivian shot him a cold look. "Look, baby," Vince started. "I apologize for what I said. You are young and beautiful. I just blurted it out. I didn't mean it to come out that way." "Does she know?" Vivian said. "No, of course not. If she knew, my head would be on a spike." Vince took a cigarette from the pack on the table and lighted one, feeling as though he were greeting a long-lost friend for the first time, and the terrifying world was suddenly less terrifying. Caution be damned. Vince got on that wagon he had vowed never to go on again. "And what if I just show up one day at your house and chat with—" "What's her name again?" Vivian said. A wave of terror washed over Vince. "Linda, baby, let's be rational about this. Why ruin a family? A family that we built with so much care. Leave Linda out of this. This thing is between you and me," pleaded the man. "This thing. First, it's a baby, not a thing, Vince. Second, you accused me of cheating and whoring around. Then you disappeared for a month. Is that what I'm supposed to expect when the baby is born?" Vivian said. "You have decided you are keeping the baby?" Vince asked. The young woman turned away. "Maybe, I don't know," she said. Vince finished his cigarette and put it out in the overflowing crystal ashtray. "Can we discuss it at least?" Vince started. "Third, why should I share you with her? An old hag that stays at home and reads books all day. Do you even have sex with her anymore?" "Ugh, I don't want to imagine it even," Vivian said, still looking at the small window, her back turned to Vince. "Watch your mouth," he said. "You don't have the right to—" "I am the future mother of your child, Vince. I have every goddamn right in the world. What's stopping me from going over there, introducing myself to Linda and chatting with her? Maybe I can give her some pointers on how to properly suck up—" Vivian shot up and ran to the bathroom, down on all fours and head plunged into the toilet bowl. Here they were again. The intrusive thoughts. It would be so simple, wouldn't it? She was so tiny and defenseless. One swift blow to the head would do it. Or maybe a quick cut with a razor would solve it all. No more mistress and an unborn bastard child. Nothing left to jeopardize the sweet peace at home. Just a couple of minutes deprived of breath, maybe. His mind's eye painted vivid pictures of grisly scenes, each more brutal and disturbing than the other. It would be so easy, he thought. After all, he was a judge. He knew cops and detectives. The whole system could be manipulated in his favor, only if he wasn't so afraid to swing that crystal ashtray in his hand. Only one swing, and it would be over. "Come here," Vivian pleaded. "That is your moment, Vince. Just push her head in and let the water do the rest. You can resolve all your problems in less than 3 minutes. Nobody knows you are here. DNA samples can be manipulated. This horny little bitch will ruin your life. Do it, Vince. Do it. Kill her." "Enough," Vince shouted at the wall. "Do you think I want to be doing this right now, asshole?" screamed Vivian. "You did this to me. You will go through this whether you like it or not." Vivian motioned to Vince to step away. She locked the bathroom door. He started pacing in the small living room. There were pictures of Vivian and her family all over the place. Vince looked at all of them. He was caressing the frames of the ones that affected him the most. The sensation of bare wood under his fingertips soothed him. Eventually, Vince stopped at his favorite one of them all. He loved that photo. Vivian held each parent's hand on her first day of school. What was he thinking? How could he take a life? Her life? And the life of his unborn child? How could he even contemplate such a thing when his own daughter was barely 21? What if some old creep decided to kill her because an unexpected pregnancy happened? Vince felt nauseous. Unwillingly, he imagined the death of Vivian by his hand for the last time. Then he discarded that thought, vowing never to think of it again. "You are a disgusting, scared old man, Vince," he whispered. "I wouldn't say disgusting, but scared and old, I can agree with that." Vivian stepped out of the bathroom. Vince smiled, placed the photo on the table and embraced her. Her lovely lavender smell embraced him as a warm spring afternoon. "I love you," Vince said. "I love you too, but we must figure this out, baby," Vivian replied. "I know, baby, and we will. I promise. I am here for you, no matter what." They spent the night talking and mulling over the possibilities. Vince relented to telling Linda everything in the morning. Whatever might happen, damn it all to hell. He left after a restless night. He was happy and at ease as he strolled to his car, lost in thought. Then he froze in place. A sight he had prayed so desperately not to see, only 3 feet in front of him. His face was as white as a sheet, his breathing heavy and his palms sweaty. Chapter 4. The black shoebox remained empty for months, and since that faithful day, it hadn't produced a single object. Dawson Jenkins enjoyed a period of carefree living, a complete release from 7 years of responsibility. A 7-year morning routine during which he had no idea what the day would bring or how horrible it would be. Now everything seemed easy and natural, like taking a breath. He even forgot for a while. His burden no longer hung over him like the sword of Damocles, and the only reminder of its power was the black metal box atop which rested the shiny red button. No amount of alcohol and chance hookups could prepare Dawson Jenkins for what was about to follow. He began to witness some of the most horrific and violent scenes he had ever seen, precisely 62 days after the red-buttoned box appeared. One such scene involved a young mother pushing a stroller down the street when a glass panel from a nearby skyscraper collapsed, crushing the poor girl and her infant to pieces in an instant. Paramedics and police surrounded the scene with yellow tape, but the massacre was still visible. Dawson's psyche was set to overdrive. What if he had pressed that button? What if he restarted the world? This unfortunate soul wouldn't have been wasted in such a horrifying accident. Everywhere he turned, he witnessed tragedies, deaths, and destruction. Buildings collapsed seemingly out of nowhere, burying people alive under the rubble. Buses full of children turning over and catching on fire instantaneously. The stench of burned human flesh would linger in his nose forever. Freak accidents and car crashes taking the lives of innocent passers-by. People were torn in too, rivers of blood flowing on the streets. Random muggings turned into double or triple homicides and rapes. Dawson had to witness all of it. Faith, or some other twisted, ineffable force, placed him at the front row of death and didn't want to let him go. Usually a sane person would rationalize that these things happen, and all of this seemed like a sign. What was he supposed to do? He was no superhero. He was just a simple data analyst. Dark thoughts swirled in his mind. Dawson kept opening the box every morning. Day after day, it remained empty. The poor man spent countless hours on his couch, hand over the red button, contemplating ending it all. One simple press of a button would end all of this misery. Week after week, Dawson would go on drinking binges because he was miserable and could not talk to anyone about his suffering. Alcohol seemed to dull everything. Somehow, the theater of carnage revealing itself to him daily was way more manageable while being drunk out of his mind. After a couple of months, Dawson stopped going to work. Another month after that, he stopped going out at all. Home was safe. He was alone there, and nothing could happen at home, right? The carnage didn't stop even then. Local architects seemed to disregard the average distance between constructions. The windows of adjacent buildings were sometimes so close to one another that a simple extending ladder would be enough for one person to cross over. Unfortunately for Dawson, he lived in one such building. Multiple neighbors from across the street started taking their lives in front of their windows, all for Dawson to see. Some were blowing their brains out with old revolvers, and others hanging themselves in their bathrooms. The massacre was haunting him. To combat this, Jenkins ordered a whole pallet of 2x4s and barricaded every window in the apartment. If he had to live in darkness, so be it, as long as he didn't witness all the death and destruction outside. Every now and then, tiny sunbeams peeked through the gaps in the planks, revealing a face that had not had a decent night's sleep in months. Dawson rubbed his face. His long brown beard tickled his fingers. He lit up a cigarette and trudged slowly through the unsanitary carpet. Pizza boxes, take-out packages, and paper plates on the floor made moving through this trash maze cumbersome. He lifted the lid of the black shoebox. It's been 3 months now, and still nothing. He turned on the TV. The police are still searching for former Supreme Court Judge Vincent Thompson. If you have any information about the suspect, please get in touch with the station or your local police department. The chief of police has issued this picture, the woman reading the noon news said. Dawson looked at the TV. It depicted a middle-aged man with a perfect hairline, a clean-shaven face, light brown eyes, and a chiseled jaw. Dawson smacked his lips and lit a cigarette. A tiny beam of sunlight was streaming through the barred window as he rested against the wall, letting the warmth of the sun play on his grizzled hair. Then there was a loud scream from above, a sound that was now as familiar to him as the crunch of a cigarette smoked in the dark of night. A boy fell on the fire escape platform right in front of Dawson's window. Drops of blood managed to make their way through the cracks and softly landed on the man's face. The gargled moans and pleads for help died seconds later. The boy had fallen 17 stories. It was over. His body contorted in a way no human body was designed to. Blood was spewing out of his eyes and ears. Death was victorious again, playing its gruesome song before Dawson's eyes. He let out a blood-curdling roar. His fists landed heavily on the wooden boards. Then, once more, again and again, Dawson punched. Try as he did, he couldn't break them. His arms fell limp and bloody. His knees hit the ground, and an uncontrollable burst of emotion spilled out of the shaken man. Without much thought, he jumped up on his feet and grabbed the black shoebox, threw it in the tub, drowned it with the fuel for his Zippo lighter and set it alight. His tears glistened brightly with the red and orange flames in the bathtub. Dawson proceeded to trash his apartment. Inch by inch, he meticulously and violently bashed and kicked everything, until the only intact thing was the black metal box and the red button. The fire from the bathroom was quickly spreading everywhere. Soon the whole apartment was a raging inferno, devouring everything in its path. Calm and without much of a hurry, Dawson grabbed the box with the red button and slammed the front door behind him. The building burned down a couple of hours later. Tens of people burned to ash. It wasn't the box this time, it was him. He was responsible for their deaths, and he had to live with that, no matter how long he had left. He had lost all sense of sound, sight, or smell. His body was acting on pure instinct, fueled by rage and despair, as he climbed the 72nd floor of a skyscraper not far from where he used to live. He kicked the door leading to the roof until either it broke or his foot broke. He didn't care which. The door finally gave way. Dawson busted out on the outside, screaming and cursing. In front of him, the whole skyline of the city lay bare. A massive jungle made of concrete and glass, protecting and sheltering those who dared to wander its cursed depths. Is this what you wanted, huh? To restart all this? Bring us back to caves? Fuck you. Dawson screamed at the black box. He tried to throw it with the bit of strength he had left, but his hands, so tired from pummeling the wooden bars, dropped it on the ground. The man fell on all fours and started weeping. A black leather shoe stepped next to the crying man's arm. "Are you all right there, buddy?" the mystery man said. "Do I look all right to you, asshole?" Dawson replied. The mysterious man walked away. Dawson looked in the direction of the footsteps. On the very edge of the building, a man dressed in a sharp suit sat, his feet dangling above the people passing below. He was smoking. Hey, get off of there, man. What are you doing?" Dawson said, whipping blood and tears off his face. "I don't think I will," replied the man. "You can join me if you want, but I am no longer getting off this ledge. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Dawson grabbed the box with the red button and limped over to the man. He slammed the box on the ledge and sat next to him. "Dawson." The smoking man turned over. He had the perfect hairline for his age, light brown eyes and a chiseled jaw. It was Vincent, the man said. After shaking hands, the men continued to look off into the distance. "You are wanted for murder, you know that, right?" Dawson spoke. "Yeah, tell me about it. I had anticipated that it would take them a lot less time. But here we are," Vincent said. Forgive me for asking, but who did you kill? I haven't been paying attention to the news lately, though your face is everywhere. Vince darted a look at Dawson. I didn't kill anyone, he said. Dawson returned the look. Right, and the police are just randomly searching for a killer. When your picture popped up in the database, they went, "Oh yeah, that guy seems like a cold-blooded murderer. A Supreme Court judge would do the trick," Dawson said. Vince took a long drag out of his cigarette. "I thought about it," he started. "I thought about it for a little while. I looked at my situation from every angle. At some point, this seemed to be the only solution until one night. That night, I saw how vulnerable and scared she was. My heart bled for her. I loved her. But I couldn't do that to my wife and family. I had to come clean. I am not a murderer. I am many things. Liar, philanderer, but I am not a murderer. I put those in prison for Christ's sake," Vince said. "Mistress?" Dawson asked, and Vince nodded. The distraught man put his face into his arms and let out a barbaric scream. A few people below looked up, startled, but saw nothing, supposing it was just a weird bird. "I don't understand what happened," Dawson insisted. Vince wiped snot from his face. "She was pregnant, man." Dawson's eyes opened wide. "What kind of monster would I be to kill a pregnant girl?" Vince was beginning to hyperventilate. "Holy shit, pregnant," Dawson said. "The night I saw her, we talked it out. We decided to keep the baby, and I would return home and talk to my wife. Confess everything. But when I left Vivian's apartment..." "Vivian?" Dawson's heart sank. "Yeah?" Vince replied. Certainly was not the same chick. There are a lot of Vivians in the world. Something deep inside Dawson convinced him otherwise. Could it be her? Could this be the same Vivian who both condemned and saved the world? He wanted to ask, but didn't dare interrupt the story anymore. 3 months ago, was she hanging out in a dive bar on 255th and 6th Street? Dawson couldn't help himself. "I have no idea, man. Why?" Vince replied. "Sorry, never mind. Keep going," Dawson said. "Anyway, I noticed Linda standing next to my car as I was leaving the apartment. I thought I was cautious about not waking her up. I thought Linda knew. She had suspected it for a long time. Now she had proof. We got into the car and drove home in silence. As soon as we entered the house, all hell broke loose. She was feral. Cursing and screaming, throwing plates and vases. Kept asking me, 'Am I not enough for you? What didn't I give you, huh? I gave you everything I ever had, and it still wasn't enough for you, was it, Vince?' I couldn't move, man. I was paralyzed, looking at the ground and just taking it. All of it." Vince lit up another cigarette. "Did she know that Vivian was pregnant?" Dawson asked. "I told her eventually. At some point, Linda resolved to go and confront Vivian, so I had to stop her. That news broke her. She was catatonic for days." "Sheesh," Dawson exclaimed. "Days passed and Linda was a mess. I called Vivian to warn her. One night I came home and saw bloody footsteps on the front porch. I lost it. I thought, Linda. When I walked inside, I found her kneeling on the floor, hands, face and chest drenched in blood, multiple locks of long brown hair next to her, and with a butcher knife in hand." Vince covered his mouth with a shaking hand, his eyes bloodshot. Dawson reached over and put his arm on the man's shoulder. Dawson started. Vince couldn't take a proper breath. His breathing was so shallow that he gasped for every breath, his whole body trembling violently. Vince nodded in confirmation. "And the baby?" Dawson asked. 77 times in the belly. She butchered her like an animal. Even after all of this, she was still my wife. I took all the blame for what had happened. I had to." Vincent had a complete breakdown. Dawson hugged the man as tight as he could. When will this torment end? When will he be free of the brutality that surrounds him? He felt responsible for the little girl's death. The black shoebox was punishing him, fine, but why her? If only he had known the anguish and despair it would cause, he would have burned it years ago. Vincent, shaking violently, buried his face in the stranger's shoulder. They stayed like that for a while. Dawson felt the warm rays of the sun on his face. He wanted to feel sorry for this poor bastard, but deep down, Dawson knew why Vince was on that roof that day, the same reason he was. Maybe there was hope. "Hey man, listen, I can't possibly imagine what you are going through. I truly can't. But," Dawson said. He let go of Vincent and grabbed the black metal box with the red button. "What if I told you that If you pressed this button, the world would restart, Dawson said. Vince gave a double take to his new friend. Huh? He said. 7 years ago, Dawson started, I was ready to go to work. I opened my front door, and on the doorstep lay a black shoebox. I didn't remember ordering new shoes, but I picked it up. As soon as my fingers touched it, a strange and tingly sensation came over me. It was like that feeling you get when someone runs one of those scalp massages through your hair without you knowing it. It was weird. I put the box inside and left for work. During that day, I had the pestering sensation that I had forgotten something. When I got home, I examined the shoebox as close as I could. No markings, no logos, no receipts or labels, nothing. Then I opened it, fully expecting one of those glitter bombs from the internet. To my surprise, there were no shoes inside but an EpiPen. I picked it up. It didn't make any sense, right? Why would someone put an EpiPen in a shoebox and leave it in front of someone's apartment? Honestly, it felt quite weird, but I put the EpiPen in my pocket, threw the shoebox in the trash, and proceeded to have a nice evening at home. Around 10 p.m., a friend of mine called me to go grab a beer and a bite, and I obliged. On the way to the bar, I saw a woman, not more than 25, having a seizure next to a bus stop. I ran over to her, and she was barely breathing. She managed to mumble something like, "Pen, pen, pen." I grabbed the EpiPen out of my pocket and stabbed her. Thank the heavens it worked. It was a miracle I had that in my pocket. She thanked me profusely and left. Then it hit me. I saved her. With the EpiPen from the shoebox. Texted my friend that something came up and hauled ass straight for home. I took the shoebox from the trash and opened it. It was empty. To be honest with you, the feeling of saving a life is intoxicating. I searched the internet all night about a mysterious magical shoebox that saved lives, but I couldn't find anything. Fell asleep on the keyboard. The next morning, I made coffee and opened the box again. Lo and behold, there was a shaving razor inside. Proceeded to save the life of a police officer that day with it. Vince's eyes glistened with wonder as he chain-smoked cigarette after cigarette, consuming every word of this strange tale that this peculiar bearded man, who obviously had not taken a shower in at least a week, was offering. Dawson proceeded to explain everything that had happened in the past 7.5 years to him in great detail. The black shoebox, the objects, the heroic deeds, and the selflessness. The appearance of the red button and the consequences that followed after he refused to press it. Hours passed, and after Dawson finished talking, he lit his last cigarette, exhaled a large plume of smoke, and stared at the setting sun. "Vivian, she saved us all," Vince whispered as he gently dragged his finger on the surface of the red button. Temptation is rising in him. He could bring her back. He could reverse everything. True, it would take thousands of years, but she would be born again. The world needed her. Destiny wouldn't be so cruel as to make it so she was never born again. One press of this button and all would be undone. All the suffering of the world, all the pain and anguish of everyone would be immediately erased. But what if this new world was worse? What if... "So what'll it be, Judge?" Dawson asked. Vince had become very good at spotting lies, no matter how ridiculous this narrative seemed. It was his job, after all. Dawson's words rang true, every single one of them. There was not a hint of falsity, only pure, unadulterated truth. This is incredible. It sounds way out of my comfort zone, something that came out of science fiction or something, Vince said. He placed the red button box back on the concrete with great care. If anyone can decide whether to press the button, I figure it has to be a judge. That is your job, right? Decide people's fates. What's the difference between 100 men and 8 billion? Dawson said. The implications could be catastrophic. Billions of lives erased in a minute. Let's say all the bad ones are fine. Bad and broken people probably need a restart. But what about young and innocent ones, lives that had never even began halted? Because a few million bad apples, it's not fair. The scales of justice must always be balanced. What if... Yeah, I know all the what-ifs. I've been living with them for months. The ethical, spiritual, philosophical, and physical are all of them. I am asking you. You, Vincent, the Supreme Court judge with the screwed-up life, who's being hunted by the police for a crime you didn't commit. Will you press the button? Not as a judge, as a man who lost everything, because I am too weak to do it, and I paid my price. Would you have the balls to give the world one more chance? Or would you have the courage to press the button and have faith that everything will turn out all right? Dawson said, flicking his burning cigarette. I don't know, Vince said. He was transfixed by the pedestrians below. There were so many beneath his dangling feet. They went about their business, lost in their own little worlds, like an endless swarm of ants. Whoops, I dropped my cigarette. Let me get it, Dawson said. Vince's gut churned as a black shadow passed by him. Dawson was in free fall. The man in the suit gripped the edge of the skyscraper and leaned forward as much as he could. As Dawson's body neared the ground, the seconds stretched like hours, and the plummeting man let out an enormous chuckle. He was finally free, free of the carnage, free of blood. He could finally embrace peace. Dawson's body landed on the pavement with a sickening thud. Veins popped on his face, surrounding a wide smile. Small streams of blood trickled from his eyes and ears. A last few confused short breaths, then silence broken only by the heart-wrenching scream of women. Witnessing death for the first time, this was Dawson's last brush with death. It was all over. On top of the skyscraper, Vince couldn't hold it in any longer and hurled. He just stared at the depths below. A huge crowd gathered around Dawson's lifeless body. Sirens tore through the crowd. Vince realized something. They would blame you for this death as well, he whispered. Uncontrollable laughter burst out of his mouth. Vince looked at the button, palms stretched over it. It could be all over in an instant. But what if this man was lying? Vince was a human after all. He was in a bad state and he could have judged him poorly. No matter how exhausted he was, his gut never lied to him. He judged him correctly. With one button press, he would provide the world with a much-needed do-over. But what if the world turned out worse? What if the wars and bloodshed never ended? What if... His thoughts turned to Vivian. What would she do? His palm gently rested on the wretched button. What would she do? Vince was screaming it over and over, hand shaking. His muscles tightened to the point of snapping. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The paramedics and police officers below were examining Dawson's body when they heard a gunshot atop the skyscraper. Seconds later, a second body smashed to the ground. As the last rays of the setting sun were fighting for survival above the horizon, on top of a skyscraper lay a black metal box with a brilliant red button on one side, cold and unpressed. The end.